The air in the Grand Galactic Arena wasn't just cold, it felt heavy. Thousands of different alien species sat in the stands, their eyes fixed on the center of the floor. They hadn't come for a fair fight. They had come to see a slaughter. In the middle of the dust stood Krell. He was a monster of a being, 7 feet tall, covered in natural bone armor, with 4 arms that had crushed the skulls of some of the deadliest beasts in the galaxy. He was the Grand Hunter. To his left stood his opponent, a human named Leo. Leo looked pathetic. He was wearing a simple, dirty jumpsuit. He had no armor. He had no claws. He didn't even have shoes. Compared to Krell, Leo looked like a snack, not a fighter. The crowd began to laugh, a deep, rumbling sound of thousands of aliens mocking the weakest species in the stars. Is this a joke? One alien shouted from the front row. I paid 1,000 credits to see a hunt, not a cleaning boy getting stepped on. Krell grunted, a sound like grinding rocks. He looked at Leo with pure boredom. Human? Krell's voice boomed through the speakers. Usually, I let my prey run for a minute. But for you, I'll make it quick. I don't want to waste my breath on something so soft. But Leo didn't move. He didn't cry. He didn't beg for mercy. He just stood there looking around the arena. His eyes weren't on Krell's giant plasma spear. Instead, Leo was looking at the floor. He was looking at the ceiling. He was looking at the small, tiny details of the room that nobody else cared about. Krell frowned. Something felt weird. He reached down to his wrist and pressed a button on his tactical scanner. This was the most advanced piece of tech in the galaxy. It could find a hidden needle inside a mountain. It scanned for energy signatures, poisons, hidden blades, and thermal bombs. The blue light of the scanner washed over Leo's body. The crowd waited for the screen to show 0 threats. They expected the scanner to say this human was as harmless as a blade of grass. But then, the sound changed. Instead of the usual soft beep of a finished scan, the device let out a sharp, piercing scream. A red light began to pulse violently on Krell's wrist. It was a warning sound Krell had never heard in 20 years of hunting. Krell looked at the screen. His eyes widened. The screen didn't say armed. It didn't say NARMED. In giant, glowing red letters that flickered with urgency, the scanner read. The stadium went silent. The laughter died so fast it felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Environmental hazard, Krell whispered to himself. He tapped the device thinking it was broken. Computer, explain. Is he carrying a bioweapon? Is he a walking bomb? The computer's voice, usually calm and robotic, sounded like it was struggling to process the data. Negative, the AI replied. No external weapons detected, however. Subject's brain activity shows a 99% match with extreme pathfinding and structural destruction. Subject is currently identifying 412 ways to kill you using only the objects in this room. Krell looked back at Leo. The human wasn't looking at him. Leo was staring at a single, loose metal bolt on the floor about 10 feet away. Then, Leo did something terrifying. He didn't scream. He didn't rush forward. He simply looked up at Krell, and he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a mechanic looking at a machine he was about to take apart. You know, Leo said, his voice quiet but echoing in the silent arena. This floor is made of reinforced steel, right? But the bolts holding the floor plates together, they're made of a cheaper alloy. They can't handle sudden vibrations. Leo tapped his bare foot on the ground twice. Thump, thump. And that spear you're holding? Leo continued, pointing at Krell's high-tech plasma weapon. It's beautiful, but it uses a magnetic stabilization field. If a piece of metal, say a loose bolt, gets sucked into that field, well, it doesn't just stop working. It turns into a grenade. Krell took a step back. For the first time in his life, the Grand Hunter felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He was the one with the armor. He was the one with the spear. But the scanner wasn't lying. The human wasn't a fighter. The human was a disaster waiting to happen. Leo reached down and slowly picked up the loose bolt. He tossed it up and caught it, his eyes never leaving Krell's throat. Are we going to start? Leo asked. Or are you going to keep staring at your watch? The hunt hadn't even begun, and the most feared hunter in the galaxy was already sweating. The heavy iron gates of the arena slid open with a groan that sounded like a dying beast. Beyond the gates lay the steel jungle. It was a massive, enclosed zone filled with the skeletons of old spaceships, rusted gears the size of houses, and mountains of jagged scrap metal. It was a playground of death, designed to give hunters like Krell every advantage. Krell entered the zone slowly. He didn't need to rush. His heavy boots made a loud clank sound on the metal floor, a sound meant to terrify his prey. He adjusted his thermal visor. The world turned into shades of blue and purple, except for the bright orange heat signature of the human. Run, little ape, Krell shouted, his voice echoing off the rusted walls. Show me how fast you can crawl before I pin you to the floor. Through his visor, Krell watched Leo. The human wasn't running in a straight line. He was moving with a strange, calculated rhythm. Leo stopped for a second near a pile of trash. He reached down and grabbed a long, rusty copper wire and a heavy, jagged rock. Krell actually stopped walking and laughed. The sound was deep and insulting. A wire and a rock. Krell shouted, shaking his head. You think a rock will stop a hunter of the High Empire? My armor is built to withstand meteor impacts. My skin is harder than the stones of your home planet. Krell looked at his wrist-mounted tracker. He wanted to see the human's heart rate. He expected to see the frantic, chaotic heartbeat of a dying animal, somewhere around 180 beats per minute. But the tracker showed something impossible. Leo's heart was beating at a steady 60 beats per minute. It was calm. It was regular. It sounded like a drum in a marching band. It wasn't the heart of a victim. It was the heart of a predator who was currently work. Why aren't you afraid? Krell growled, feeling a strange annoyance rising in his chest. He raised his plasma spear. The tip glowed with a deadly purple energy. He took aim at Leo's leg. He didn't want to kill him yet. He wanted to play. But just as Krell pulled the trigger, the bright orange glow of the human vanished from his visor. What? Where did he go? Krell barked. He toggled his settings. X-ray mode. Motion sensor. Sonar. Nothing. The human had completely disappeared. It wasn't magic, and it wasn't high-tech cloaking. Krell realized with a start that the human had dived into the steam veins, a network of old, leaking pipes that carried boiling water and hot gas across the floor. To a human, the heat was dangerous, almost unbearable. But to an infrared sensor, the steam created a wall of white noise. The human was using the environment to erase himself from existence. Krell stepped into the steam zone, his spear ready. You can't hide in the heat forever, human. You'll cook yourself alive. Suddenly a sound came from above. Ting. Ting. It was the sound of metal hitting metal. Krell looked up. He saw the human high up on a catwalk, balanced perfectly on a narrow beam. Leo wasn't hiding anymore. He was busy. He had wrapped the copper wire around a massive, hanging crane hook that weighed 5 tons. Hey, Krell! Leo shouted down, his voice sounding cheerful. Did you know that these old ships used negative grounding for their electrical systems? Probably not. It's a very old, very dangerous design. Leo tossed the rock. He didn't throw it at Krell. He threw it at a pressurized steam valve 10 feet to Krell's right. Sealange! The rock hit the valve perfectly. A burst of high-pressure steam exploded outward, hitting Krell's side. It didn't hurt his skin, but the moisture and heat instantly fogged up his high-tech thermal visor. Curse you! Krell ripped the visor off his face, throwing it to the ground. I don't need sensors to kill a bug like you. Krell looked up, but the catwalk was empty. Leo was gone again. But the wire was now vibrating. Krell looked down at his feet. The copper wire was snaking across the floor, hidden under the shallow water and oil that leaked from the machines. The human wasn't just using the rock as a weapon. He was using the rock to change the room. He was using the steam to take away Krell's eyes. And now, he was using the wire to bridge a gap between a live power core and the metal floor Krell was standing on. Krell took a step back, but his heel caught on a piece of scrap. He realized, with a sudden jolt of terror, that he was being steered. Every time he moved, he was moving exactly where the human wanted him to go. You're not hunting me, Krell whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. You're building a trap, and I'm the one walking into it. From the shadows of the pipes, Leo's voice drifted out, cold and steady. I told you, Krell. I don't have natural weapons, no claws, no armor. So I have to make the world my weapon. And right now this whole room is starting to hate you. Krell gripped his spear tighter, his knuckles turning white. He was the most feared hunter in the galaxy, but for the first time, he felt like he was standing in the middle of a giant machine that was about to turn on. Krell was no longer laughing. His breath came in heavy, ragged gasps that hissed through his secondary lungs. He had entered a narrow hallway made of stacked shipping containers and rusted hull plates. It was a bottleneck, a place where a hunter should have the advantage. But as he stepped forward, his heavy boot pressed down on a piece of metal that felt slightly too hollow. Click. It was a tiny sound. In a loud arena, you wouldn't even hear it, but in the dead silence of the steel jungle, it sounded like a gunshot. Krell's instinct screamed. He threw his massive body backward just as a shadow dropped from the darkness above. A 500-pound slab of industrial engine scrap, suspended by a web of frayed copper wires, swung down like a giant rusted hammer. Boom! The floor shook. The metal slab smashed into the ground exactly where Krell's head had been a microsecond ago. The force was so great that sparks flew, and the smell of ozone filled the air. Krell looked at the trap in horror. This wasn't a primitive weapon. It was physics. The human had used the height of the ceiling and the weight of the junk to create a strike more powerful than a plasma cannon. "Show yourself!" Krell roared, his voice cracking with a hint of something he hadn't felt in centuries: panic. He raised his plasma spear and fired blindly into the dark rafters. Pew pew. The purple bolts of energy melted the scrap metal above, sending drips of liquid iron falling like burning rain, but there was no scream of pain. There was no body falling. The human was gone. Again. "You're fast, Krell," Leo's voice echoed. It didn't come from one place. It bounced off the metal walls, making it sound like the very room was speaking. "But you're heavy. You rely on that armor to keep you safe. You think because you're hard to break, you're impossible to stop."
"That's your mistake."
Suddenly, the flickering floodlights of the arena groaned and died. Total darkness swallowed the hallway. Krell froze. He reached for his emergency backup lights, but his hand stopped. He heard a wet, sparking sound coming from the main power junction box at the end of the hall. The human hadn't just flipped a switch. He had reached into the high-voltage box and physically ripped the master cables out. "How?" Krell whispered to the darkness. "The voltage alone should have fried your nervous system. Rubber boots, Krell." Leo's voice drifted from the left. "I found a pair of old industrial safety boots in the scrap pile. Humans are very good at finding the one thing that keeps us alive while everything else dies." Krell swung his spear in a wide arc, the glowing tip acting like a dim flashlight. The light caught something, a tripwire. No, it was a network of wires, hundreds of them. They were pulled taut across the hallway at different heights. Some were at ankle level, others at neck level. The human had turned the narrow hallway into a spider web. Krell tried to move forward, but he felt a sharp sting on his leg. One of the wires wasn't just wire. It was a jagged, sharpened strip of serrated metal. He stepped back, only to feel another wire snag on his shoulder armor. He was trapped in a forest of invisible blades. "You think this stops me?" Krell snarled, trying to regain his pride. "I will tear this whole building down before I let a hairless ape beat me." He activated the overload function on his spear. The weapon began to hum, vibrating with enough energy to level a small house. He intended to blast everything in front of him into ash, but as the energy built up, he noticed something strange. The air felt thick. It smelled like grease and old fuel. Krell looked down. Underneath the web of wires, the floor was covered in a thin, shimmering layer of liquid. It wasn't water. It was hydraulic fluid from the broken pipes. And it was highly flammable. The human wasn't just trying to trip him. He was waiting for Krell to use his weapon. "Don't do it, Krell." Leo's voice was right behind him now, a cold breath against his ear. "One spark from that spear, and this entire hallway becomes a furnace. I'm already behind a blast shield. Are you?" Krell's finger trembled on the trigger. He was the predator, the Grand Hunter, the king of the arena. But as he stood there in the dark, surrounded by wires he couldn't see, standing in a pool of fuel he couldn't escape, he realized the scanner was right. The human didn't need a gun. He had turned the very air Krell breathed, and the ground Krell stood on, into a death trap. "What are you?" Krell asked, his voice a broken whisper. "I'm a human," Leo replied, "and you're in my workshop now." Krell's high-tech combat suit began to vibrate violently. A high-pitched alarm started ringing inside his helmet, a sound that only triggered when the suit's life support systems were failing. "Warning," the AI's robotic voice flickered in his ear. "Atmospheric pressure shifting. Oxygen levels dropping to 14%. Ventilation system has been reversed. Toxic fumes detected in the intake." Krell staggered, gasping for air that felt thin and metallic. He looked at the giant ventilation fans above. They weren't blowing fresh air anymore. They were sucking the oxygen out of the hallway and pumping in smoke from the burning scrap piles. "What are you doing?" Krell screamed, his voice sounding weak even to himself. "This is an arena! There are rules! You're supposed to fight me?" "I am fighting you." Leo's voice came from the darkness, sounding perfectly comfortable. "But why would I punch your armor when I can just make the air stop working?" "You see, Krell, your suit is built to survive a vacuum, but it's not built to survive a smart technician. I didn't break your suit. I just recalibrated the building." The realization hit Krell like a physical punch. This wasn't a duel. It was an execution. Most species in the galaxy fought with their bodies or their guns. If their gun broke, they lost. If their claws were blunt, they died. But humans fought with everything. They didn't see a room as a place to stand. They saw it as a collection of parts they could use to kill you. Krell felt a soft touch on his back. A hand. He spun around with a roar, swinging his glowing plasma spear in a massive circle. But his arm didn't move the way it should have. Snag. A loop of high-tension wire, hidden in the dark, caught his wrist. Krell growled and pulled with all his massive strength, but the wire didn't break. It was wrapped around a structural support beam. The harder Krell pulled, the deeper the metal wire bit into his wrist joints, locking his arm in place. Leo stepped out of the shadows. He wasn't hiding anymore. He walked slowly, his footsteps silent on the oil-slicked floor. In his hand, he wasn't holding a sword or a gun. He was holding a jagged, sharpened piece of hard plastic, a leg from a broken office chair he had found in the trash. "You checked me for weapons," Leo said. His voice was terrifyingly calm, like a teacher explaining a simple lesson to a slow student. "You looked for lasers. You looked for blades. But you forgot the most important thing about my people." Leo stepped closer, right into the dim purple light of Krell's trapped spear. "Humans didn't survive our home world by growing bigger claws," Leo continued. "We didn't survive by being the strongest or the fastest. Earth tried to kill us for millions of years. It gave us diseases, earthquakes, and predators 10 times our size. And do you know what we did? We didn't grow armor. We built hammers. We didn't grow wings. We built planes. We survived by breaking the world until it did exactly what we wanted it to do." Krell struggled, his 3 other arms reaching for the human, but Leo stayed just out of reach, moving with a strange, liquid grace. "Right now," Leo said, gesturing to the shaking walls and the dying lights, "this arena isn't a stadium anymore. It's a giant trap. I've jammed the gears of the floor plates. I've looped the power from the lights into the cooling system. I've turned your own steel jungle into a cage that is slowly closing." Krell looked up and saw it. The massive metal walls of the hallway were actually vibrating. Leo had removed the safety pins from the hydraulic stabilizers. The heavy shipping containers were starting to lean inward. "I don't need a plasma spear to kill a giant," Leo whispered, holding up the sharpened piece of plastic. "I just need to wait for the giant to get tired, get hungry, and run out of air. And then, I just need to find the one soft spot in your neck where the armor doesn't reach." For the first time in his life, Krell felt small. He was a warrior of 1,000 battles, but he felt like a bug under a microscope. He looked at the human's eyes and didn't see anger or hate. He saw focus. He saw the look of a builder who was almost finished with a difficult project. "Please." Krell wheezed, his oxygen alarm now a solid, deafening scream. "The scanner told you," Leo said, turning his back to Krell as the sounds of grinding metal grew louder. "I'm not a soldier. I'm a hazard. And a hazard doesn't have mercy. It just happens." The sound of grinding metal suddenly stopped. It was replaced by a much more terrifying sound, the sound of Krell's pride breaking. The Grand Hunter of the galaxy, a creature who had hunted fire, breathing lizards and armored ice beasts, fell to his knees. He didn't fall because Leo had punched him. He fell because his own suit had betrayed him. The high-tech bone armor, worth millions of credits, began to hiss and emit thick black smoke. System critical. The suit's AI whimpered. Total thermal overload. Servos locking. Manual eject. Failed. Krell gasped for air, his eyes wide with confusion. What did you do?" "I have a triple-layer thermal shield. My suit can walk through lava." Leo walked over to the back of Krell's neck. He reached down and pulled out something tiny from the suit's primary cooling intake. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't a high-tech virus. It was a small, round pebble, a piece of common gravel from the arena floor. "You have a great suit, Krell," Leo said, holding the pebble up to the light. "But it has a weakness. It needs to breathe. I saw this little guy on the floor and noticed your cooling fan had a gap exactly this wide. I just had to wait for you to walk past a steam vent so the pressure would suck it in. One tiny rock in the right gear, and your million-credit armor becomes a metal coffin." Krell tried to move his arms, but the suit had locked up completely. He was a prisoner inside his own strength. He was stuck in a kneeling position, looking up at the weak human who had defeated him without ever throwing a punch. Suddenly, the arena lights flickered and surged back to life. The human had reconnected the power, but not before the entire galaxy had watched the hunt on the emergency backup cameras. The silence in the stadium was absolute. No one laughed. No one cheered. The thousands of alien spectators sat in total shock. They had just watched a god be taken down by a janitor. Leo stood over Krell for a long moment. He looked at the sharpened piece of chair plastic in his hand. The crowd held its breath, expecting the bloody finish. But Leo didn't strike. He didn't need to. He simply let go of the plastic and it clattered harmlessly onto the metal floor. "The hunt is over, Krell," Leo said quietly. "I hope you enjoyed the show." Leo turned around and began to walk toward the massive exit gates. He didn't look back. He didn't celebrate. He just walked with the tired, steady pace of a man who had finished a long day of work. As Leo reached the gate, the scanner on Krell's paralyzed wrist gave one final, long beep. The red screen cleared, and a new message appeared in clear, bold letters for everyone in the front row to see. The message flashed across every screen in the arena. It was a warning that would be sent to every star system in the Federation. The humanity file was being rewritten across the entire universe that night. For centuries, the galaxy had measured strength by the size of a species' teeth, the sharpness of their claws, or the power of their lasers. They looked at humans and saw a species that was soft and slow. They thought that if you took a human's gun away, you took away their power. But as Leo disappeared into the tunnel, leaving the most feared hunter in the galaxy trapped in a pile of junk, the lesson was learned. You can take a gun away from a soldier. You can take a sword away from a knight. You can strip a human naked and throw them into a room filled with nothing but trash and shadows. But you can never truly disarm them, because a human doesn't carry a weapon. A human is the weapon. Their brain is a factory of destruction. Their hands are the tools of change. They are the only species that looks at a broken world and sees 1,000 ways to turn it into a blade. The steel jungle was quiet now, but the galaxy would never be the same. From that day on, whenever an alien empire looked toward the small blue planet called Earth, they didn't see prey. They saw a hazard sign, and they stayed very, very far away.